All right, if we can bring everyone to the table, because this brings to the beginning of our 145th meeting as a Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage. And we are continuing with our study of Bill C-91, an act respecting Indigenous languages. We have with us today from the Inuvialuit Regional Corporation, Dwayne Smith. And we have with us from the Wet'suwet'en Language and Culture Society, Ron Mitchell and Jennifer Wickham. So we will go in the order that you appear on the agenda. If we can begin with Mr. Smith, please.
Well, right into it. Thanks. First of all, I'll apologize if I break up because I'm just getting over a cold. Greetings, Suvlami. Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. As the chair has mentioned, my name is Dwayne Ingaxic Smith, and I'm the chair and CEO or Chief Executive Officer of the Inuvialuit Regional Corporation. It's the very far northwest portion of Canada, but still in the country. I represent almost 1 million square kilometers of Canada within my region. My Inuvialuit name was given to me by my grandparents. It's a custom process in our system. In regards to the language issues, when you understand it so well that it is in your heart and your mind, it is not only a means to convey information and obtain things, it is a source of strength, pride, and belonging. It is the caretaker of our history and our culture. I do want to point out and say thank you for this opportunity as well. It's taken us 151 years for me to sit down here in front of you. And I hope we can develop that much more quickly in regards to reconciliation. I wish that I could share more of my language with you. I wish that I could help my extraordinary heritage become our extraordinary heritage as Canadians. When I say I wish that I could, I'm the third generation of assimilation within this country, where we were not allowed to speak our language. Either if we did try to, then we were either beaten, etc., or put into certain conditions where we would learn not to speak our language. So I'm the third generation of that. I grew up in the wake of Canada's mission to make us all the same. I have lost something fundamental because of those policies and the laws that entrenched them. I'll now give you a quick description of our region and the state of our language. The Inuvialuit Settlement Region. The Inuvialuit are the Inuit of the Western Arctic. It's only 9 hours by jet, but like I said, still in the same country. I welcome you to come and visit us sometime. The ISR, as it's referred to, is one of the 4 regions of Inuit Nunangat, our homeland. There are 6 communities located in the ISR, and we have over 6,000 Inuvialuit registered and are enrolled with us. In response to Canada's accelerating development agenda and assimilation policies in the Arctic, the Inuvialuit negotiated the Inuvialuit Final Agreement, which was signed and brought into effect in 1984. One of the 3 principal objectives of both Canada and Inuvialuit under the IFA is to preserve Inuvialuit cultural identity and values within a changing northern society. When I say both, we're both signatories to this treaty, so we're both obligated to make sure that it's implemented to the greatest extent that we can together. The state of our language. Later today, you will hear the president of ITK, Nitan Obed, talk about Inuktitut, which is the language of Inuit Nunangat. For clarity, Inuvialuktun is the name we give to Inuktitut in our region. We have 3 dialects within Inuvialuktun: Salar-Mute, Humar-Mute, Kangayar-Mute. The speakers of Inuvialuktun are able to converse with Inuktitut speakers right across Inuit Nunangat as well as into Alaska and Greenland. We have been tied together by our language and culture for millennia. A long period of contact along with Canada's past assimilation policies and an inequitable funding for language, have extensively corroded the vitality of Inuktitut in the Western Arctic. Compared to high percentiles of individuals able to speak Inuktitut in Nunavik and Nunavut, only 22% of Inuvialuit have conversational ability in our language. We still have a small window of opportunity to see Inuktitut preserved where it continues to thrive and to see it rehabilitated in our region. I'll now turn to the bill. Comments on Bill C-91. My fellow Inuit presenters will discuss the process in which we were engaged on this bill, as well as the draft text that our working group has proposed in support of this process. I will not repeat these comments due to the time constraints. My intention today is to identify those aspects of Bill C-91 that are of particular importance for our regions where the vitality of Inuktitut is more severely diminished. Bill C-91 is a positive start. The bill includes Canada's acknowledgement that rights of Indigenous peoples recognized and affirmed by Section 35 of the Constitution Act 1982 include rights related to Indigenous languages. This is absolutely correct and reflective of Canada's existing obligations under the Inuvialuit Final Agreement. Bill C-91 sets as a main purpose to support the efforts of Indigenous peoples to reclaim, revitalize, maintain, and strengthen Indigenous languages. Related to this, the bill sets out the purpose of the Act to establish measures to facilitate the provision of adequate, sustainable, and long-term funding for the reclamation, revitalization, maintenance, and strengthening of Indigenous languages. These measures are absolutely necessary. It is our view, however, that to achieve these purposes for Inuvialuit, we will need to continue working together to refine the legislation. First, it will be necessary to acknowledge that Inuit Nunavut is a distinct linguistic region within existing laws that recognize Inuktitut as an official language. This would allow for sophisticated measures that have a real chance of success to be implemented. Second, it will be necessary to reevaluate the creation of the Office of the Commissioner of Indigenous Languages and its role in jurisdictions like the Northwest Territories and Nunavut that already have a similar office. Third, it will be necessary to impose a requirement to enter into bilateral agreements with our organizations to further the purposes of the Act, rather than leaving this as a mere option. As we have observed over the last few decades in my territory, funding that is flowed through the territorial government is not distributed in an equitable or even logical fashion. It tends to go where the voting populations are greater and where the chance of success is weak. Due to the time, I will stop my comments on this, and I will entertain your questions as we proceed. With that, Kuyinaini, Kuyinak, thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. We'll now go to Mr. Mitchell and Ms. Wickham, please.
Dari say hagwal na satni nakanak skakasli utan piyek da kutsoden dalkamukaste we have a big jakan kasas kas natis natanise. My name is Ron Mitchell. Hereditary chief name is Hagwal now, and Wet'suwet'en is my first language. And the Dalkamukastewe court case, I was one of the translators and the only one that could write the language back then. So I walk 22,000 square miles with my pencil, name places, hills, creeks, mountains, all in Wet'suwet'en, and all our laws in Wet'suwet'en, and our feast, or potlats, protocols and all the chief names. So, thank you. I would.
Hadi Saisozi, Jennifer Wickham, Gidim Denizen, Executive Director, Wet'suwet'en Language and Culture Society, Esden. First, I would like to start by acknowledging that I'm an uninvited guest here in Anishinaabe territory. We thank you for the invitation to discuss Bill C-91. I'm here with Hagwelnech, Ron Mitchell, House Chief of the Lixiliu clan, as represented by the Office of the Wet'suwet'en. We are here on behalf of the Wet'suwet'en Nation. Our territory spans 22,000 square kilometers, as Ron was saying, from Burns Lake to west of Wet'suwet'en, formerly known as Morristown in British Columbia. In our nation, our Wet'suwet'en language is reaching a critical point. Only 3% of our population currently speak our language fluently, and the average age of speakers is 70 years old. Bill C-91 is a significant step towards helping us revitalize our language, but it must have measures that will empower our nation to lead the language revitalization work and research for generations to come. This means having guaranteed funding to build our own capacity, to create immersion programs for Wet'suwet'en living within and outside our territory. After consulting with some members of our Wet'suwet'en leadership, language champions, and community members, we have the following feedback regarding the legislation. An inclusive definition of Indigenous governance and organizations. In the interpretation section, Part 8 of Section 7 and Section 5, Purposes of Act, we want to ensure that the definition of Indigenous governing body includes traditional hereditary governance systems that are not defined by the Indian Act, like our own Wet'suwet'en house and clan system. In the spirit of the Act, if the spirit of the Act is truly to respect Indigenous self-determination, an inclusive definition is required for meaningful nation-to-nation negotiations regarding funding. We want to ensure that Indigenous organizations include nation-based, nonprofit societies like the Wet'suwet'en Language and Culture Society. In the past, we have been denied federal funding because we were not considered a national organization based on the Canadian state's definition of nation. We suggest the following changes. Indigenous governing body means a council, government, or other entity, including a traditional hereditary government of unceded lands not defined under the Indian Act, that is authorized to act on behalf of an Indigenous group, as well as Indigenous organizations, including nonprofit societies or other entities. Second, we would like to address guaranteed long-term funding for generations to come. Section 7 needs to demonstrate that guaranteed long-term funding, secure from changes in government, will be available to Indigenous nations and communities for what we foresee as the 3 phases that our language will undergo, which are as follows. Language revitalization. Research, mobilization of resources and communities, human and technical capacity building, implementation of revitalization strategies and programs, and health and wellness strategies. The next would be language stabilization, production of new generations of fluent speakers, growth and stabilization of programs and human resources that meet their growing needs. And third, extension of language programs and services to the broader non-Indigenous community to support the self-determination of any Indigenous nation and promote cooperation within our territory. Financial means and infrastructure need to be in place. These phases all require significant long-term financial commitments that will span many generations. Wet'suwet'en people should be the ones leading these endeavors. Part E of Section 5 to 7, Purposes of Act, should facilitate nation-to-nation agreements. Should a provincial body be considered as the means to negotiate agreements and disperse funding, this should be done with the political support of the Indigenous nations of that province. Since education funding flows from Indigenous Services Canada, INAC, the bill needs a clear statement facilitating coordination and cooperation between all levels of government to guarantee that language revitalization funding will increase our capacity to achieve full immersion in our schools, and that one funding source will not offset another. British Columbia is home to the majority of Indigenous languages, all of which are endangered. Language funding needs to reflect this reality. Equal division of funding between provinces will only lead to inequality and create competition and division where needs are high. Third, official language status and legal protection. For an Indigenous nation to attain full self-determination, it needs the ability to assert itself through its language. An Indigenous nation's language is intrinsically tied to its territory. The ongoing colonization and alienation of Indigenous peoples and languages from their lands are unacceptable. For the UN DRIP to become meaningful, this needs to be addressed. Indigenous languages need official language status equivalent to French and English. This is essential to nation building. In the Purpose of Act section, it should be included as follows. Facilitate and legally protect the ability of Indigenous nations or governments to declare their unique languages as the official languages of their traditional territories and implement their use in the public domain. For example, the reclamation of traditional place names on maps and signage, and public education. And next, I will address minority language rights of Indigenous children. A large proportion of Wet'suwet'en children receive their education through the public school system. Bill C-91 must include a declaration protecting the right of Indigenous children in minority situations within and outside their home territories to receive an education in their language, similar to Article 23 of the Constitution relating to French and English minorities. Without legal protection of that right, there is no real means to implement Indigenous language education in the public school system, and our ability to start immersion programs or schools outside of our territory is limited. Selection of Indigenous Language Commissioner and Director. We want Bill C-91 to ensure that the people selected are qualified and recognized as competent representatives of Indigenous peoples. We suggest the Commissioner and Director selected will be Indigenous language champions with demonstrated experience and expertise working in Indigenous language revitalization within Indigenous communities. As to the location of the Language Commissioner's office, since British Columbia has the highest concentration of Indigenous languages, we think the Commissioner's office should be located in that province. Indigenous languages and intellectual property. We consider all Wet'suwet'en language research, materials, and documentation to be the intellectual property of the Wet'suwet'en Nation. We are in opposition to Section 24, which would give Statistics Canada and Library and Archives Canada any authority to conduct research and store Indigenous language content. The only role we see for Statistics Canada and Library and Archives Canada is to facilitate access to information and resources on language and culture in their existing collections and databases. We are entirely capable of collecting our own statistics and archiving our language. This legislation should be empowering all Indigenous nations to build their own capacity, not delegating this work to federal institutions. In closing, if Canada is truly committed to respecting the rights of Indigenous peoples, then the recommendations that we bring forward to you and have throughout the regional consultations should be reflected in Bill C-91. Wet'suwet'en people and other Indigenous nations have been fighting to keep our languages alive since colonization began hundreds of years ago. We expect this government to live up to its promises and begin addressing the injustices that continue to harm Indigenous peoples in this country today. This legislation must reflect a new way of thinking that is not founded on paternalism, tokenism, and archaic colonial structures. We appreciate the opportunity to have our voices heard, and we'll be watching carefully to see how well this government is listening. Wagoose, much respect. Awetsa.
Thank you. Alors maintenant, nous commençons la période.
So we'll now move on to a question and answer period, and we'll start with Mr. Breton for 7 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. I will be speaking French. If you have your headsets on, that way you can have the interpreters Is it working for you, Mr. Smith? My first question will be for you. Very well. Thank you for being with us, first of all, for this study of this important government bill. Mr. Smith, my first question will be for you. We are all aware that there is a great deal of challenge surrounding preserving the Inuktitut language. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I would like more details regarding the experience of your corporation that you lead when it comes to fighting to preserve that language in the Northwest Territories.
Well, first of all, thanks for the question. Where will I begin? But, well, it starts with, like I said, the third generation of assimilation. When the government first came into our region, we were required to send our kids to an education system, to put them into facilities that strictly enforced speaking in English only. When you look at the education system today, there is no obligation or requirement of the government of the region to provide any education within the Indigenous languages. So you're asking me where the issues are, where can we improve it? I think that we need to get it as a requirement in the education system, as well as to work with us to develop some of our own people to become the teachers that can provide it in our own language. We're not saying that we don't want to teach them English or French or anything else, but we do think that in our region that Inuktitut should be a part of the curriculum. And I have to agree with my colleagues here from BC in regards to how we can collaborate better with each other in regards to signage. We are on our way in collaboration with different departments of Canada in regards to identifying traditional place names within our region. So that's a positive aspect in that regard. But when we have an education system that's still partly being imposed on us without adequate engagement, involvement, participation of our organization in the delivery, then we still have a problem here. Thanks.
Combien de langues autochtones?
How many Indigenous languages are there, Mr. Smith, in the Northwest Territories? Inuktitut is part of those languages. Are there many?
There are 11 official languages within the Northwest Territories. In my area, it's primarily English, French, and Inuvialuktun or Inuktitut. Up in the capital area, there's much more First Nations in that area that have their Indigenous languages recognized. That's the extent of what the government has done only, that they've recognized these Indigenous languages.
Maintenant, on va y aller peut-être avec...
Now, I'd like to move on to your opinion when it comes to the challenges of preserving the Inuktitut language. After reading the bill, which you have surely done, are these challenges addressed? Do you believe that these challenges are addressed in the bill, Mr. Smith, again?
Sorry, she was fading out a bit, but I think I've caught the question. I have looked through it. Like I said in my opening statement, I don't think that it fully addresses the issues, and that's why I said that we should be working together to improve the legislation moving forward. I don't think it is adequate enough in regards to areas that it should be mandatory, but we need a tool moving forward, and we see this as an opportunity for us to work directly with the federal government in this case to develop processes where we can improve the language and the use of it, not only as individuals, but throughout the different governance processes, such as health, education, where the primary people that are being serviced are the Inuit in my region. So that's where I see a lot of need for improvement, and as well as to make it a requirement, but also to provide us with the adequate tools and the resources for us to start to implement this once we together develop an implementation process and plan.
Très bien. Alors, deux questions peut-être.
I have two quick questions for Mr. Smith again. The first is, maybe you said it, but I'm not sure if I heard it. In a general way, do you support the bill? Is that what I'm hearing?
In a general way, yes, I do. I see this as a tool, but it needs a lot of improvement.
Très bien, très bien. J'avais bien saisi.
Very well. I did understand correctly. And my last question, I will ask it of Mr. Mitchell and Ms. Wickham. There was a co-development process before the bill was drafted. How do you think this approach worked? Was it a success? Were you consulted in that co-development process? Ms. Wickham.
Quickly, you have already gone over time. I would
c'est
like
vrai?
you to, yes, vous avez moins d'1 minute là qui en restait. If you could
Sorry, you had less than 1 minute left.
bring it out through other answers as well.
Sure. So the Wet'suwet'en Language and Culture Society was part of the consultation process, and I believe you all have a copy of our position paper on the draft legislation. And so we do address in that letter that the feedback that we gave while it was in consultation was not reflected in the bill.
Thank you. I'm just going to clarify, we do have it, but it's in translation. So while I have a copy, everyone doesn't have it yet. You will all have it. And if we can go to Ms. McLeod, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for presenting, and from British Columbia. I'm also from British Columbia, so appreciate the complexity with all the different languages in our community. You know, essentially everyone voted at second reading, and of course our job now is to make sure that, the legislation is technically right. And I just want to make a comment, and maybe the analyst will be able to follow up on it. There was a witness who did actually question, he said it had never been done before to proclaim on the Constitution like they did in Section 6. To his knowledge, that had never been done. And I'd just be curious, he wondered if it was constitutional. My question through you, Chair, to the analysts, could they research if it has ever been done before? Because I think it's a piece of valuable information, and that particular witness did not know. Thank you. So I'm going to start with Ms. Wickham, and Section 24. I've sort of been struggling a little bit with the way the legislation reads. It is a may, and I know other witnesses have expressed the same concern that you have expressed. The way I read it is it would not allow the Office of the Commissioner to arbitrarily move forward. It just enables them to do it if it's appropriate, and I would presume according to sort of full protocol and respect for IP, etc. So are you saying it's not okay the way it's written? Because that's not how I read it. I thought the may just provided flexibility for the communities to move forward in partnership if they wanted to. So can you maybe share a little bit more about your concerns, Sarah?
Yes, I think the concern is that our communities have been researched, and we don't have access to that information is not implemented in our communities in a meaningful way. And so we're really cautious when something like this is written into a bill where, the other bodies would be given access to our communities and our language itself. So any resources that are developed out of that, or we don't want to see anything archived or put away that has to do with our language. It should be our people building capacity within our communities to be able to do that research and to store it as we see fit, or implement it in our community as we see fit.
I absolutely agree, and we agree with that. But do you think that this, when they put may, allows for them to do that without the permission of the communities involved? Because I was just seeing it as perhaps enabling if the communities chose.
So maybe that needs to be more clearly written.
Okay, thank you. And I think I'd like to ask both the witnesses. You both had several comments in terms of what you believe needed to be done to improve this legislation. Let's say if the government chooses not to move any amendments, do you believe this legislation should be supported as is? Mr. Smith and then Ms. Wickham.
Well, I would prefer to see areas where it can be improved upon. Unfortunately, due to the time and the situation we're in regards to this, at the very least, we would like to see something put in place so that we, like I said, we have a tool that we can use, but it needs a lot of work, in my view, but nothing's ever perfect when it first starts out anyways.
Okay, so it's not perfect, but you did indicate it was a step, and even, obviously it's the government chooses which amendments it will accept or not accept. You believe it's supportable as it is if they choose not to?
If there's an opportunity for it to be improved, we'd like to see it improved upon.
Great, thank you. Chief Mitchell?
Are you saying if there is no opportunity to make any changes on this bill in the future?
No, I think legislation always has the opportunity for changes, but we're doing intensive committee meetings right now. We're getting lots of recommendations. If it stays exactly like it is without any changes, do you believe it's supportable?
Short answer?
You're not a politician if you give a short one.
I'm not a politician. I think that the consultation process with communities was really, really rushed for this bill. There were communities that weren't able to be part of the consultation in BC and in the North. And so I think that there are quite a few things on our list that need to be clarified and or changed. But like Mr. Smith stated, this is a very positive step. And I think that as long as the government is open and willing to make some changes in the future, if it doesn't happen right away, obviously we would prefer these changes to happen before it is passed. I do realize that, the government is on a bit of a time crunch right now, but we can be optimistic, right?
Thank you. Mr. Smith, I want to go back. You had 3 recommendations, and I wish you only had a chance to very briefly talk about them. I wonder, maybe this question. I think I'll have another round. I can get back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Jolly-Bois, you have 7 minutes.
Good morning, and thank you for coming and presenting to us, both organizations. Your information is very important, and what you said today validates my thinking in various areas. Where I come from, within Daysmith and Mississippi Churchill River riding, the majority of my constituents, the majority of the children, Métis and First Nations, attend public systems. And I have And I feel nervous about how they are left out in this discussion. And you bringing it forward validates that thinking. And I think across Canada, we need to have that discussion more and more. With having said that, how can we ensure, as I'm hearing you guys and your answers, how can we ensure that we push the government a little bit further for the recommendations that you bring forward? We can try. That is, I do like to see some changes in the legislation. Both, if you can.
Well, I think that might be a question for you guys. How can we push the government to make that part of legislation? I think that if the government is really serious on reconciliation with Indigenous communities, and this bill being put forward in good faith in partnership with Indigenous communities and taking our feedback seriously and implementing it, I think would be a good step forward. As far as what we can do to ensure that our children are not left behind, I think if we could include specific language around immersion available to our children in and outside of the community. Like you said, there's, within the public school system, the majority of our members, our house members and our clan members, are spread out. They're not necessarily living on the reserve or within the territory boundaries, the 22,000 square kilometers. We have a large population of Wet'suwet'en people and children that are living in other places like Prince George and in Vancouver. And so if we can push for Wet'suwet'en language becoming an official language within its territory boundaries, I think that is going to increase the chances of our children being able to access the language. And then if it's recognized within BC as an official language within its territories, then, we would be able to have Wet'suwet'en immersion school available to membership in the other areas like Prince George and Vancouver. Currently, if you have as little as 15 children that are a minority language in an area, it's enough to start an immersion school, and we would like the same for Wet'suwet'en.
Thank you. Mr. Smith?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Very briefly, I would suggest you guys take the recommendations that we're putting forward, as well as others, into consideration in improving the bill right away. This is the opportunity for it to be done. Secondly, looking at how we can work together again to develop an implementation process with each other so that we can start to identify areas where this bill might be lacking as we move forward in regards to enacting it, developing operations on the ground within each of our communities so that we can work on implementation again of the different areas that this act is supposed to address.
Thank you. Do I have? Oh, wait, I have time. Thank you. So, listen, thinking back to some of the witnesses that have come forward, and even National Chief Perry Bellegarde was here as a witness, as well as Mr. Clem Chartier from Métis National Council. They're both pushing really hard for this legislation to move forward as is. But I'm hearing from various groups that changes are recommended. One piece that I think back to the discussion that we're having, the discussion again around the provinces. I know BC and Nova Scotia are doing are really invested quite a bit of time and energy in the languages in their provinces, and I like to see other provinces and territories do the same. In your opinion, both organizations, have you had other discussions with other organizations and people across Canada about, again, the children who are attending public schools across Canada?
So the Wet'suwet'en Language and Culture Society uses a lot of the immersion methods that are also used in Secwepemc territory with Secwepemc, the language in Chase and the Kamloops area. And so that has been a really beneficial relationship where we can share resources. They have an immersion school in Secwepemc territory, and they've developed a lot of different methods that we are able to use in our language nest and also in the elementary school that is in Witset. The language teacher there meets with them regularly, and so there aren't a lot of examples or programs that we're able to liaise with and collaborate with, but the people that are out there doing similar work to us, we have definitely built those relationships and are trying to move forward with. Most recently, our elementary school is going to be developing online games using the Wet'suwet'en language, and that's being modeled off of the school in Secwepemc territory.
Okay, thank you.
I'll go to Mr. Hoag for 7 minutes.
Thank you very much for your comments and testimony. And just so we are clear, that the purpose of this process is to look at improvements that we can make. So certainly we're most open to any type of suggestions you have. One of our challenges is that there are often testimony which is in conflict with each other, and so we have to make some judgments with respect to that. And certainly the values that some of you have highlighted in terms of the overall intent of the legislation, I think is the important part of it, and then how we start to articulate that hopefully reinforces the things that you're saying. And clearly the role of the commissioner and the directors, who, as you've appropriately pointed out, should be Indigenous people that have understanding of that knowledge. They will have a lot of the articulation responsibilities in terms of where that goes and what that looks like. So Indigenous communities could start their own school boards, for instance. There are a number of things that they can do to be able to carry out the actions that they want to do, they want for that. Ms. McLeod made reference to British Columbia, which I think has given about $50 million to start looking at Indigenous languages and actions around Indigenous languages. How do you see that being allocated in British Columbia, given we have almost half of the Indigenous languages from Canada in BC? How do you see that being allocated? Do you have some principles or ideas around how that might be done?
I think one of the really important things, like we mentioned in our feedback, is that we're working on a nation-to-nation basis. And so each of those nations, it's determining who is representative of that nation. And so for Wet'suwet'en people, I know that we are a little bit special, a little bit distinct in British Columbia, because we still have a very intact traditional governance system. And so the Wet'suwet'en Language and Culture Society works very closely with our hereditary chief system and our clans and our houses that govern our territory. And so I think it's really important that it be written in here, and when the money is being dispersed, that it's not just dispersed to band councils, because that is a very limited geographic scope, and we want to be able to have all of our membership access the language resources and the language programs. And so that would include people that are living on reserve, which is what currently the chief and council represents, is just the reservation. But we also want it available to our membership that are off reserve and possibly even off the territory. At WLCS, we have a lot of requests for online material or Skype classes, and we just don't have the capacity to do that. And so I think it's really important that when you're looking at disbursement of funds, that you're dealing with a group or an entity that is able to serve the entire nation and not just the reservation.
My understanding is that the province has not yet decided how that allocation will take place. So there may be an assumption that it's, as you're describing, that people can apply, that anyone, any individual, any council, any organization, any school district, the one could apply. Is that your understanding as well at this point?
I'm not sure. Yeah. I think it'll be interesting to see, and hopefully is available equitably
And it'll
between
be
the
interesting
nations.
to see as well as the federal money and the provincial money that may be coordinated across the country, whether or not there will be a set of values or principles that are reflected consistently so that there can augment the issues that are there. Would you have any thoughts around what those principles might be, other than what you've already outlined in terms of access for anybody?
No, I think the only thing that's really coming to mind is that fair is not equal, or equal is not fair. So, you know, like I had already mentioned, there's such a disproportionate number of languages within British Columbia compared to the rest of the provinces. So that's going to look quite different than it would, funding in BC would look quite different than it would, say, in like Saskatchewan.
To Mr. Smith, can you help me to understand how your traditional territory differs or is similar to that of Nunavut, Tinagavik, so I can get a grasp for what the differences might be?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I could hear you, but it wasn't coming across on here. The reason I'm here, I think, is to emphasize the dire situation of the language within my region, my specific Inuit region, compared to the others. Our area, the language is dying much more quickly, fading out than the other Inuit regions. They at the very least have tools available to them where they have governments, their own governments, that they can use to develop the proper revitalization processes, whereas our region only has a government that recognizes our language. And in relation to the question you're asking about funding, our territory got an increase in funding, but our region received a cut. So you tell me where we have 19% of the overall territorial Indigenous population in my region and we're receiving cuts. So it doesn't make sense. So that's why I'm also stressing that these revitalization and resources and capacity needs to be developed directly with us, so that we're maximizing the development of these programs and tools for the children, as well as every other Inuit person in my region to the extent that we can.
Thank you.
For 5 minutes, please.
And I'd like to pick up where I left off, Mr. Smith, with giving you the opportunity to illustrate your 3 recommendations in a more robust way, because I know you were limited with your 10 minutes, and I just want to try and understand them all a bit better.
Well, I'll try to be as clear as I can, as well as short as I can, but the first one that I was stressing was that Inuit Nunavut should be recognized as the region across Canada, as the linguistic region across Canada for Inuktitut.
Okay, and so can I just intercede there? We've had other people suggest that the legislation should have an addendum to it with some clarity around the different languages. Do you see that as a place where you would
Again,
have that particular have that notified or
part
acknowledged?
of the earlier discussion that we had, if that's the only extent that we can have it recognized at this time, yes, for that part.
Okay.
In regards to the commissioner, well, I think I've already answered in relation to the response I gave Mr. Hogue in relation to how the government of my region conducts its language affairs. That's why I was stressing the concern we have with yet another commissioner. We've seen a commissioner in our region who has no teeth, no ability, no authority, etc. The person is actually French now, I think, and we're seeing a revitalization of French in a region where it has less than 5% speaking. So doing a good job in that area, but there's nothing in regards to Indigenous languages. So if we're going to have a commissioner at the federal level, then we want to see a direct relationship with him so that we're ensuring, Inuktitut is recognized and provided the proper tools to implement. The third one is in regards to, the funding and developing a direct working relationship. I just emphasize how my government of my area received an increase in funds, but the Indigenous peoples, not only ourselves, the different First Nations south of me, also received cuts. So, we have a disconnect with the government that you're providing funds to, the federal government is in that case, and not meeting their obligations in regards to or they're developing their intents without proper collaboration and input of ourselves, as an example.
I'll go to Ms. Wickham. I think you raise a very good point in terms of who gets recognized. And of course, that's going to be changing too, because of course we'll have, as nations perhaps reconstitute or become stronger. So you were suggesting that we just really be careful around our language in that area so that we were ensuring that we met the needs of the different sort of communities across the country. Do you see that as being more, could you just talk to that particular piece a little bit further in terms of where you see that happening within this legislation?
Yeah, I think, and of course I'm here representing the Wet'suwet'en, and so we, like I said, have a very unique position in British Columbia. I've heard that there are only 3 nations that have within BC that have a intact traditional governance system, and so that means that they have been practicing their governance since before contact and continued to practice their governance even throughout the potlatch ban when Canada made it illegal for them to practice. And so the Wet'suwet'en are one of those nations. We still practice our bathlats or our potlatches, our feast system, to this day. In fact, I have a bathlat this weekend with my clan. And so I think that historically and currently that our governance system hasn't been able to be affirmed by this government, and places like the Wet'suwet'en Language and Culture Society haven't been able to apply for language funding. We've been denied federal funding because we aren't recognized as representing the nation, and only reserves are recognized. So we would like to see that, the wording around that changed so that it's fair to nations like ours that aren't dependent on the Chief and Council ban system.
Thank you.
And we will now go, we will now go to, is there someone here? I was looking for Mr. Andasangari, but he is not here. Is there someone on here who's going to take the final 5 minutes to begin? Okay, Mr. Long.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon to my colleagues, and or good morning, and good morning to our witnesses. Thank you very much. Ms. Wickham, you mentioned, and it struck with me because I've heard it in previous testimony, just about making sure that minority children are captured in this or looked after. And I mean, obviously, some of the Indigenous territories, communities are so vast and so large. I think all three witnesses mentioned that, how does this bill get to those children, for lack of better words, that aren't, in a community that wouldn't have the infrastructure, the government, that kind of thing. Can you just kind of elaborate on how you see, C91 capturing and covering them?
I'm trying to think of an example of, because I'm prepared to answer on Wet'suwet'en territory.
That's fine. You can answer even with respect to that. Just kind of generalize.
Right. Well, I think that it's really important for our children to have access to the language, and certainly within the school system. I am a trained teacher, so I'll speak a little bit to our curriculum. In British Columbia specifically, we have more of a focus now on traditional knowledge. And so certainly language could fall under that. I think the issue that we really want to see is to have Indigenous languages protected and made official within their territories. For example, in Wet'suwet'en territory, which covers the town of Burns Lake, the town of Houston, and as well as Smithers, those are the municipalities within our territory. We would want to see Wet'suwet'en traditional place names recognized with signage. I know in other places in British Columbia, they have the local Indigenous languages on their stop signs, for example, much the same way you would see things done with French and English. As driving through Ottawa from the airport on the way here, we saw that. And so I think that's really what we want emphasized, is that we need to have our Indigenous languages protected and made official within their respective territories. So in Ottawa, it would be Anishinaabeg. In Kamloops, it would be Secwepemctsín. And so really making that a community focus, I think, and having the language available within the school systems would not only make it available to Wet'suwet'en students, but it would make it available to all students. I know within the high school in Smithers, for example, when they teach the BC First Nation Studies 12 class, it's predominantly non-Wet'suwet'en students that are taking that class. And it creates very rich opportunities for reconciliation to happen on that level. And so that's what we're hoping to see within our own territories as well.
Thank you very much. Great answer. You also mentioned three phases that I found very interesting. You mentioned about revitalization, stabilization, and then extension. Can you just kind of elaborate briefly on how you see C91 with respect to the extension part of that phase?
Extension, I'll just quickly say, is very far in the future for us right now.
How far?
Years. So in order to get to extension, we would have to first have stabilization, and our current population that is fluent is declining rapidly. Like I said, the average age is 70 years old, and we are only at 3% of fluent speakers.
That's what you're saying. So would you see this whole thing unfolding over, would you think you could get to the extension part in 10 years?
Optimistically, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Sorry, the bells looked like they were flashing for a second there, and then they stopped. So I will figure out what that was all about. But that does bring this first hour to an end. I would really like to thank all the witnesses for your testimony today. It was very helpful. You brought a lot of interesting ideas for everyone to be considering. We're going to suspend briefly so that we can set up for our next set of witnesses. Thank you.
So we're starting up again, and we now have with us for the second hour, we have President Natan Obed from the ITK, Tim Argetsinger, political advisor there, and William David, legal advisor. So if you want to begin with your opening statement, then we'll go to the questions after. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, members of the committee, for allowing for Inuit Tapiri Kanatami to witness here for you today. I also want to recognize Dwayne Smith, the chair of the Inuvialuit Regional Corporation, who is a board member for Inuit Tapiri Kanatami, who just witnessed before this committee. Inuit are one people sharing a common language, Inuktitut. Inuktitut has many dialects, and Inuktitut is the term that we have decided to call our Inuit language. Lots of conversation in our community about what that term is defined by, but in the end, there are definitions of words and the etymology of words, but there also are words that are used for political practice. So Ontario might be an Indigenous word, but you all know Ontario as something very different as a political space. We are in the midst of developing our self-determination, and the words that we use in Inuktitut are very helpful to that. The majority of our people live in 51 communities throughout Inuit Nunangat. And Inuit Nunangat is the term that we use to describe our homeland. Inuit Nunangat is a distinct geographical, political, and cultural region that makes up nearly 1/3 of Canada's landmass and half of its coastline. 84% of Inuit in Inuit Nunangat report an ability to speak Inuktitut, making our language the most resilient Indigenous language in Canada. However, a more complex picture of our language status emerges when considering conversational ability and language of the household. 58% of Inuit within Inuit Nunangat report being able to speak Inuktitut well enough to conduct a conversation, and only 40% report that Inuktitut is the language most often used at home. Inuktitut has official language status in the Northwest Territories and Nunavut. In Nunavut, the rights of Inuktitut speakers are further affirmed by the Inuit Language Protection Act. Inuktitut has official language status in the self-governing region of Nunatsiavut within the jurisdiction of Newfoundland and Labrador as well. National legislation is needed to build on existing rights for our language and to complement initiatives advanced by territorial governments and Inuit throughout Inuit Nunangat. ITK therefore recognizes the positive role national legislation can play in closing statutory and policy gaps that enable continued discrimination against Inuktitut speakers. The specific nature of this discrimination and its consequential negative impacts on the day-to-day lives of Inuktitut speakers is detailed in ITK's written submission to this committee. Bill C-91 currently falls far short of fulfilling the Government of Canada's own commitment to develop distinctions-based legislation. In fact, it was on the basis of this commitment that ITK agreed to participate in this legislative initiative at the very beginning. In the joint statement released when this legislative initiative was launched on June 15th, 2017, Minister Joly, myself, National Chief Bellegarde, and President Clem Chartier of the Métis National Council agreed to, quote, work collaboratively, transparently, and on a distinctions basis to co-develop national First Nations, Inuit, and Métis languages legislation, whose content will reflect the distinct geographic, political, legislative, and cultural contexts impacting language revitalization, maintenance, and promotion. It was our understanding all the way through this initiative until very recently that there would be a common section with provisions within the legislation, and then there would be distinction-based sections based on the specific needs and realities of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. As it stands, Bill C-91, as it is currently drafted, completely overlooks the unique status of Inuktitut and the practical needs of its speakers. In the absence of Inuktitut-specific provisions within Bill C-91, ITK is therefore proposing amendments to the bill that would help ensure that our long-standing priorities for our language are reflected in this bill. Remedying these problems has been a national Inuit priority for more than half a century. ITK was formed in 1971 in large part to advance the statutory and policy measures required to help revitalize, maintain, and promote our language. These amendments are necessary to fulfill the federal government's commitment to Indigenous peoples and all Canadians to develop distinctions-based legislation. They would ensure that our people are able to enjoy the human rights and fundamental freedoms that all peoples are entitled to, including in the political, economic, social, cultural, and other fields of public life. In our submission to this committee, ITK has therefore proposed amendments to Bill C-91 that would obligate the minister to develop a separate annex to this act in relation to Inuktitut. This annex could include provisions addressing the following areas, among others the use of Inuktitut as the delivery of federal programs and services, use of Inuktitut in the federal public service, standards to govern federal financial support for Inuktitut and specific levels of support, and measures to support the provision of Inuktitut language programs and services in relation to education, health, and the administration of justice. The amendments to Bill C-91 that we are proposing are consistent with documents and input provided by Inuit to the Minister of Canadian Heritage throughout the past 2 years. They are also aligned with the federal government's own priorities, particularly in the area of access to federal services for Inuktitut speakers. Inuit face consequential linguistic barriers when it comes to accessing public services, especially within the majority Inuktitut-speaking regions of Nunavut and Nunavik. This problem is particularly acute in law enforcement, where the limited number of Inuktitut-speaking RCMP officers contributes to underreporting of violent crime and family violence in particular. Furthermore, the Senate Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans reported in 2018 on the risks of public safety that exist as a result of the limited number of Inuktitut speakers within the Canadian Coast Guard. The committee has recommended that the Canadian Coast Guard recruit people who speak Inuktitut. Similar barriers are well documented within Quebec's provincial justice system. The federal government's unwillingness to provide services in Inuktitut within Inuit Nunagat has even served to undermine the federal government's ability to discharge its duty to consult and accommodate Inuit. Such was the case in 2017 when the Supreme Court of Canada ruled in favor of the Nunavut community of Clyde River and found that the National Energy Board's consultation process on seismic testing in the area flawed for, among other reasons, failing to communicate with Inuit in our primary language. ITK urges this committee to take concrete action to address these long-standing problems by adopting the amendments we are proposing today. These proposed amendments, so necessary to the enjoyment of dignity among our people, are modest in comparison with the rights enjoyed by speakers of Canada's 2 official languages, both within our homeland and throughout this country. Inuit are looking to each of you to demonstrate the creativity and political courage needed to help us end the discrimination too many Inuktitut speakers face in going about their day-to-day lives, and to replace symbolism with effective and impactful federal support for efforts to strengthen and revitalize our language throughout Inuit Nunagat. Nakumik.
So we will now begin our question and answer period, and we'll be beginning with Mr. Andasangari for 7 minutes.
Thank you very much, President Obed, for your presentation. And I'd like to just get a sense from you with respect to service provision in Inuktitut. So with respect to the current, for example, education system, how many teachers are available to teach Inuktitut to children right now in the different regions?
I don't have specific documentation about the numbers, but I will give you a general sense of the education system as it stands. In a number of our 51 communities, Inuktitut language of instruction is the primary language of instruction between kindergarten and grade 4. It fluctuates. In some communities, there actually aren't that opportunity. There isn't that opportunity. In many communities, it's K-2 or maybe just kindergarten. But for say my children in Iqaluit, they took Inuktitut as the first language of instruction in their education between grades kindergarten and grade 4. There have been efforts for public governments to increase the number of Inuktitut speaking teachers through specific Bachelor of Education programs for Inuit within specific jurisdictions. This is all done in the margins. This is done not as a primary concern to get us to language of instruction from K to 12 in Inuktitut, but it's done to ensure that the small gains that we have made over time continue to exist.
So where I'm really going with this question is to understand, and I think you had mentioned 4 very specific areas: education, healthcare, justice system, and you'd also indicated issues such as the with respect to policing and so on. And I think what I'm trying to get at is, are there enough speakers right now who are able to provide those services in the different regions? Because I think one of the things that it appears that the gap that we have, and many of your recommendations suggest that there should be provision in the different regions in Inuktitut, and the question is, do we have enough people who can fill those roles if we do go that route?
Well, if you continue to systemically starve our language to death, then yes, that is a prophecy that will be fulfilled. You look at the Official Languages Act and the rights that minority situations where there is a francophone or an anglophone community in a dominant community of the other language. Once you hit a certain threshold, then there are rights that minority linguistic population has to their own education, the ability to access government services. We don't have those, and so to come at this conversation by saying that our capacity is limited, therefore our rights will not be exercised or upheld. It is not the way that this country looks at its Official Languages Act for francophones or anglophones, so I'm not willing to enter into that conversation.
And I guess, looking at the other way, I mean, it may not be responsible for the government to commit to legislation where it can't necessarily implement that, right? For example, language of service. It may be very difficult to implement it if and all of this requires a plan, right? I think that's what it comes down to. It requires a plan to be able to build fluent speakers and to be able to recruit them in, the different areas of work. For example, working in the public service. But I do think for us to put in the legislation right now, it could be problematic in the sense that we're committing to something that is not feasible immediately. It will, it's likely to be feasible in the longer term. So how do we bridge that gap?
Our language rights exist, and they exist today. So this legislation is an attempt to allow for Canada to respect its own obligations under international law, under the Constitution, and that is not necessarily the same as having a conversation about capacity. The ability to exercise our rights versus the ability for us to fill all positions needed to do that, those are two completely different concepts. So in the legislative space that we're operating in today, we are fighting for the ability to have the space to build capacity that goes against the last 151 years of the lack of respect for our rights in relation to language. It's no surprise that our language use is declining in an environment where it doesn't have the same level of rights and respect as the two official languages in this country have. This country has been systematically trying to wipe out Indigenous languages, and this is still a great opportunity to push back against that. And the legislation and the ability to co-develop was an opportunity that we thought we were entering into, that it would go beyond symbolism and try to figure out how to practically implement our rights. And we still have a hope that that innovation can happen, and our submission shows that path forward.
Yeah, you have like 20 seconds, so yeah. We can go to Ms. McLeod, please, for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for presenting today. You didn't mince words in your press release after this legislation was introduced. I think you quoted it as being symbolic, only engaged in bad faith, behind closed doors, and a colonial system, and another piece of imposed legislation. So, as I say, those are very strong words, and it speaks to your disappointment. Now, my perception, the government talks about co-developing legislation, and it might be like the Trans Mountain Pipeline, where they talked about consultation with the communities that were going to be impacted, where the words didn't actually match what was happening. I mean, we're not privy to what was happening behind closed doors, but what happened that made you so uncomfortable? And I would suggest, as I say, not mincing words in terms of the outcome.
Well, I'll reference again the June 15th, 2017 joint statement, which was a joint statement that we made in the foyer at Center Block, where we all pledged to work collaboratively, transparently, and on a distinctions basis to co-develop legislation, and then had a list of different things that would be within the legislation, including distinct geographic, political, legislative, and cultural context impacting language revitalization, maintenance, and promotion. This had been preceded by a number of conversations led by the Canadian Heritage Minister, but also underpinned by the Prime Minister and the statements that he had made publicly about the ambition for an Indigenous Languages Act. All of that led to us agreeing to co-develop. We could have said no at that point. And I think this is a really key point within this, is that there's an Inuit democracy in this country. The Indigenous peoples have rights. We have the right to self-determination and self-government. The Government of Canada does not have exclusive domain on the political space that we occupy. We chose to come into this table. We chose to co-develop. We chose to spend countless hours of our time at the national level and with our regions to provide our best positions that would practically implement the existing language rights that we have, that would make a better future for Inuit. What we didn't have was, throughout the process, a response to our proposals, and then ultimately a respect for any of the foundational principles that we had all agreed to within the bill that you see that has passed first and second reading. The preambular language that talks about the importance of Indigenous peoples and importance of our language and the wrongs that have happened, yes, that is meaningful to have in a preamble of a piece of legislation. An Indigenous Language Commissioner was something that, if it was within the context of distinctions-based sections of an act, and that was a component of an act, we probably would be thinking very differently about it and would be much more at ease with it. But for this act to basically be an act that creates a federal commissioner is far short of the expectations that we had. And in relation to co-development, we do not see co-development as the same as consultation. And if it was truly co-developed, there would be segments of this act that we could point to and say these were the segments that Inuit wanted within this.
Okay. So as you're aware, AFN and MNC do support it. The bill as written, will it do harm, I guess, is the question. If there's nothing that's changed, will it do harm, in your opinion?
I can answer that to some degree. So currently in 2 of our 4 regions, in Nunavik and Nunatsiavut, the main source of federal funding, or really the main sources of formal dedicated language funding that exist, are through the Aboriginal Languages Initiative Program, which is administered by the Department of Canadian Heritage. So the bill proposes, as far as we can determine, replacing that program with a Languages Commissioner's office. The Language Commissioner will have duties that may or may not positively impact Inuit and Inuit language efforts to revitalize, maintain, and promote our language. So in absence of the only current source of dedicated federal funding in at least 2 of those regions, you could argue that the proposed provisions in the current bill would in fact be a step backward for those 2 regions.
So, as parliamentarians, I asked a question in the first panel, and I'll ask the same question again. If there is nothing that sort of changed that is meeting, the recommendations that you put forward, would you suggest that this bill should not be supported?
We still remain optimistic that the co-development process is not over, and that the provisions that Inuit have put forward, the positions that we have made, can somehow find their way into an annex of the legislation or incorporated in further readings of the bill. We're not willing to give up on this yet.
25 seconds.
So I guess that was a good political answer in terms of yes or no. Thank you.
And we will now go to Ms. Jalibois for 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you for coming. I appreciate your presentations. Other witnesses have told us that there are 11 official languages in the territories. This bill, as written, is not clear how the provinces and territories will be included in the funding model. And I'm concerned also that a province or territory will incorporate languages into curriculums. Can you comment on how this process worked in the North and how you think languages should be included in provincial and territorial education programs?
Just in hearing your last witness in Dwayne Smith talk about the way in which jurisdictions with multiple Indigenous languages have historically underfunded Indigenous languages and how there is fundamental change that's necessary. This is the reason why we're talking about an Inuit Nunangat approach within this legislation that would see our needs met through specific policy and legislative provisions and regulatory processes that fall under it to ensure that our 51 communities are serviced in the exact same way, that our rights will be upheld in a consistent basis no matter where you are in Inuit Nunangat. I think part of the challenge has been that the way Confederation is imagined, it does not have space for Inuit Nunangat. And when we introduce this topic and this idea, this advancement of our rights, in a consistent way to this government wanting to renew its relationship with us, we don't find an acceptance or an innovation, and we can't then get to the practical solutions that are being proposed through sometimes a very logical, simple approach, mainly because it's novel. So breaking up the old way of doing business, and especially within the Aboriginal Languages Initiative, which for the most of the last 10 to 15 years has operated basically in competition with Indigenous peoples competing with one another and with Canadian Heritage deciding which Indigenous projects they like best versus having the proper funding and authority for language promotion be within the Indigenous peoples themselves in the way that we choose to structure the interventions. This is what we're trying to get to. The concerns that we've had are many in relation to the lack of respect for our rights within language, and this legislation is not going to solve every last one of them, and it also is going to require additional considerations with provinces and territories. But this can be a really good place to start, and so we hope that the amendments that we're proposing can be incorporated into the bill.
So I'm glad to hear that you are optimistic, as I am too. We have a chance to ask questions, and we have a chance to bring forth our ideas and our suggestions to the government. Have you had a chance to communicate with the minister regarding the recommendations that you are making here today?
We've had a number of different opportunities to speak with Minister Rodriguez, and previously we had regular meetings with Minister Joly for the entirety of the initiative. Our access to the minister and to provide advice to the minister is not the challenge. Some of the senior technical processes that we've engaged in have not been as constructive when you look at them as a whole. We've had amicable conversations in many different rooms, and as I mentioned before, we have spent an inordinate amount of time providing our perspectives and our positions to Canadian Heritage on this bill and in the development of the provisions that you see here. What we don't see is the product of those conversations in the bill itself. So at some point, when we get beyond talking about how important Indigenous languages are and how great they are, to actually recognizing our rights and implementing them within legislation, that's where it seems to have fallen apart.
Oh, I still got 2 minutes. See, our previous witnesses said that the official languages need to be recognized and that Indigenous languages need to be included in the federal government's definition of official language in Canada, as you are saying that here this morning. Can you comment on why that is so important, again, to reemphasize your perspective and
With official languages status comes recognition of rights, which here is actually relevant because there's remedy that flows from that. With official languages status comes the opportunity for federal supports for Inuit, for provincial and territorial governments as well. I would just point out on official languages status that that was held out as something that was a possibility at the outset of this exercise, demonstrating flexibility from the Inuit side. Rather than simply asking for official languages status, we had developed a fairly extensive articulation of what we might be seeking as an incremental step to essentially achieve, or to eventually achieving that. And I believe we provided that to the committee. It's a very, very lengthy series of legislative provisions. That's not necessarily achievement of official languages status. What we would see is the necessary precursors and incremental steps to avoid the amount of disruption that would come from a simple declaration at the outset.
Thank you. Yeah.
We will now go to Mr. Long for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and President Obed. Thank you so much for coming in and giving us your presentation. I think we can all agree that the goal is to ensure that we address as many of your concerns as possible. And, I certainly respect the fact that, you have some concerns and some differences. But I mean, obviously, the hope is that through amendments, we can build capacity so that language rights, your main concerns, are protected. I think the first thing I want to talk about, I've heard your concerns regarding Inuktitut, but I want to hear your thoughts on the other Indigenous languages spoken in Inuit Nunangat. My apologies. Do you think the bill would help protect them?
Just want to clarify, what languages are you referencing? Because Inuktitut is the only language spoken throughout Inuit Nunangat. Indigenous language, sorry.
I apologize. Just as your thoughts on other Indigenous languages spoken in Inuit Nunangat, it's only the one?
Within the definition of Inuit Nunangat, it is the sum total of the 4 land claim settlement regions.
Okay.
So within that space, it is a dominant Inuit population.
Okay.
There may be individuals that are not Inuit who do speak an Indigenous language who live in our communities.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as the way in which, say, minority francophone rights exist within the jurisdiction of Nunavut, there is no such Indigenous peoples that exist within Inuit Nunangat that would make up a majority population in that way.
But do you see C91 as it currently is protecting minority languages? Because, one of the concerns we've heard from other witnesses is just the fact that, there are communities that have infrastructure, they have schools, they have systems, they have things in place, but, other areas don't at all. So how, do you see C91 reaching them, or do you have amendments you would propose to make sure that their rights and their languages are enhanced and protected also?
I would expect that First Nations and Métis would constructively work with the government on the distinction-based needs of their populations. I can only speak for the Inuit-specific considerations within this piece of legislation. That being said, if you look at the legislation now, the 2 main components are the creation of a language commissioner, and the other main component that is novel in the eyes of government and to us is the ability for the government to make language agreements directly with representatives of Indigenous peoples. We would argue that exists without the piece of legislation, and with the commissioner and the way in which the commissioner's office will work and the roles that it is meant to play. The ability for a commissioner to tell the government of Canada that it continues to not implement the rights of Indigenous peoples in relation to language is just a continuation of the same conversation that we are telling you here today. The ability for the language commissioner to actually fix that problem and compel the government of Canada, I'm not sure where that power lies, but we don't see it within the powers of the commissioner.
Would you care to comment, Mr. Obed, on statements from other Indigenous leaders, such as Perry Bellegarde, who said it was landmark legislation? We had him in last week. And, he did say, look, it's no legislation is perfect, but it's a great start. And now we need to work, to make that better. He did call it landmark legislation. And President Clement Cartier, who said it was reconciliation in action. Can you give me your viewpoint and your comments on what they said?
Under the Section 35 of the Constitution, there are 3 Indigenous peoples in this country, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. What you're running into here is the idea that we are not homogeneous. We have different societies and different needs. I think that Ontario has a very different outlook on the world sometimes than Alberta. But Ontario and Alberta are both Canadian jurisdictions. So part of Canada, but very different perspectives and underpinning ideologies about what is important and why. So I have talked extensively with the National Chief and also with President Chartier. They are supportive of Inuit within this exercise and if supportive of an Inuit annex, even in saying that other considerations for First Nations and Métis may follow, but they have been supportive throughout of the approach that Inuit have taken.
Thank you for that. Would you say that you are seeking official language status for Inuktitut at the federal level?
So we've provided proposed amendments within our submission. So in those provisions, you will not see official language status as one of the provisions that we're putting forward. So we would encourage you to focus on those 10 provisions that are within the submission that we've provided.
Okay, I'm good. Thank you very much, President.
So we will go to Ms. McLeod for 5 minutes, please, and she'll be sharing her time with Mr. Shipley, I believe.
Yep. Thank you again, Madam Chair. I think this would be either Mr. Obed or Mr. David. I think Section 6 has been welcomed by groups from across this country, but there was a witness. I'm not a constitutional lawyer, and there was a witness that flagged concerns, saying this is the first time that there has been a recognition within a piece of legislation, and wondered if there would be some challenges around the constitutionality of not having a sort of broader approach to that, and that thought that it would be more appropriate in the preamble. Again, I would love to have a constitutional expert's opinion on that, but I'm wondering, as I say, I know it's welcome. I know that, but of course, when you have legislation that people do question whether it will be a constitutional challenge, it always raises a flag to me. So, as I say, whether Mr. David is the lawyer in the room or Mr. Obed, I'd appreciate any comments that you might have.
I will start and then hand the floor to Will. I was there in the room in New York City when Minister Bennett forcefully stated that Canada was in full support, without qualification, of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And in that particular declaration, there are specific sections on the rights related to Indigenous languages. So the Government of Canada has existing obligations in relation to Indigenous peoples and Indigenous peoples' languages, whether or not the Crown recognizes them or not. But we are in a positive space where the Crown has recognized and has been very forceful in stating their support for key international instruments that then link back to this issue. I'll then provide you with further comment.
I think you'd be well advised to get some further analysis on this. The only real point that I would make is that Section 6, like much of the Act, it's very difficult to see how it would operate in practice. The reason I say that is because the rights of Aboriginal peoples are recognized and affirmed in Section 35 broadly. And then there's a framework for defining what those rights are, either through the common law or through treaty-based mechanisms. A narrow reading of Section 6, which is likely what would be offered by the Department of Canadian Heritage, would simply to state that rights related to languages are not excluded from the definition of Section 35, although they're already not excluded from the definition of Section 35. So it could actually be just quite redundant. On the other hand, someone like me would actually try to read that as broadly as I could to suggest that where there are existing Aboriginal rights, they have a linguistic element to them. I don't think that would necessarily lead to the life or death of the bill. I do think that it actually could contribute to ongoing disputes about the scope of the interpretation of that section. The only other thing I would point out there is that recognition does not run through the Act, which is really interesting. So it's almost like there's this blanket recognition of Section 35 rights there, but then our organization and Inuit broadly are complaining that the Act itself doesn't actually provide any vehicle to implement those rights. So it's an odd provision. I don't think it's not something I would consider to be fatal, but I would say that the ambiguity itself is potentially concerning to some.
Thank you. Mr. Shipley.
45 seconds.
Oh,
Just and thank you very much, Madam Chair. And just a quick question, and it's to follow up on earlier one in terms of the education. And I think it was talked about of having that there would be a degree or certification courses. Is there enough? And I think you talked about, is there enough educators? How would that actually come together across the country?
Inuit Tapekinapi is working with various federal departments to work on improvements to our education system writ large. We have a national strategy that we're trying to implement, and from early learning and childcare to K-12 to post-secondary.
I'm just thinking of logistics across, in terms of universities and colleges. How would that actually get implemented across with the likely small numbers?
I'd love to have a longer conversation with you on that. I cannot do that in 15 seconds. I will say that the ability to implement a piece of legislation is a very different thing than the rights and the implementation of rights that we are looking for.
Thank you. More time so that we could try and get that answer in. So I appreciate your brevity, but thank you for providing us with an answer. We will now go to Mr. Hogue for our final 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. And we're at the disadvantage of not seeing the submission that you've made, so we're trying to, apparently that's going through translation, and we will be getting that at some point. So, I feel like I'm not as well equipped or well informed as I'd like to be, so I find you're trying to interpret some of that, which I'm assuming we're going to see when we get your submission. Can you, I'm trying to articulate for myself the differences that you're saying that are not represented for you but are represented for the other two Indigenous groups. Can you articulate that a little more finely for me in terms of what are the two changes or one changes that would have to be done so there would be equity in terms of that? Am I interpreting that correctly?
Trying to understand the question, but I don't think that it is a case that this bill does something for First Nations or Métis that it does not do for Inuit. That is not the conversation that we're having here. I think what we are looking for is fundamentally Inuit-specific provisions of a different nature than what First Nations and Métis are saying are saying that they're comfortable with. Tim, do you want to add?
Sure, I can just try to clarify. I apologize that you don't have the submission. It was shared with the clerk on Thursday of last week. However, what we're proposing as far as amendments to the bill is concerned is that a provision be included after Section 11 of C91, which would state that the minister must pursue, in close consultation with relevant Indigenous governing bodies, the development of a separate annex to this act in relation to Inuktitut. Now we've included a draft annex, which we have drafted, which imagines what those specific provisions in that annex could be. And those provisions fall under a few different categories. They include status of Inuktitut, principles, definitions, funding, education, health and justice, language of work in the federal departments and agencies. The question came up in relation to education earlier, and I think that there may be a misunderstanding of what the rationale is for our comments on education. The specific provision that we'd be imagining including in the annex itself would state or could state that the Government of Canada must take effective measures to support the advancement and implementation of education in Inuktitut within Inuit Nunangat. Currently, there is a significant disparity in funding. that is provided by the Department of Canadian Heritage to the two territories through what's called as a shorthand the Territorial Language Accords that the Department of Canadian Heritage negotiates bilaterally with the Northwest Territories and Nunavut. So such a provision could create the opportunity for trilateral agreements being negotiated with the department and the provincial and territorial governments in whose jurisdiction Inuit live to ensure that adequate funding for education initiatives and activities are provided. Currently, through those existing agreements, those funds, for example, that are provided to the government of Nunavut for Inuktitut are not eligible for use by the public government's Department of Education. However, the funding for French language of instruction is included in that particular agreement. So I'm just providing some background about our comments earlier about the need for adequate support, equitable support for education throughout Inuit Nunavut.
Would if that annex were contained within this, do you see, would there be some equity in terms of the legislation as it applies to all Indigenous people, or would we be looking at an annex similar to that for other groups as well?
In the end, we have challenges with this legislation and this specific C91 based on the co-development that was promised to us by the Government of Canada and our expectation of an Inuktitut-specific section within the bill. And what happens with First Nations or Métis, that is not within our purview or jurisdiction. I would argue that that is more within the Government of Canada's concern.
Thank you, and I wish we'd had that before so we could be asking other witnesses with respect to that, because I think that's probably an important allocation or understanding within this. In our discussion,
that would bring you
Pardon me?
That would bring you to the end of your 5 minutes. I feel
really
like
good
what was
question.
it like? The comic strip that would end. That's all, folks. But yeah. Thank you very much. That was very helpful. And I would like to explain that the reason that it hasn't been distributed is because it needs to go through translation. So we received it last week, but it has to be fully translated before it can be distributed to the committee. So everybody will be getting all of the materials that you had provided to us, just so that you know it is being distributed. It just hasn't yet. So thank you very much for your assistance today, and that will bring this meeting to an end.